Welcome to How to Scale Your Supply Chain with Technology. I'm really excited to have three amazing guests here today and looking forward to the conversation. So just in terms of an agenda for today, what we'll do a round of quick introductions to everyone as they're jumping in. And then we will hit on some really important issues for emerging and growing brands in terms of how to actually grow the various parts of your supply chain, the key milestones to hit, and how do you kind of build your business for success. So what we're going to do is hit on that with three kind of milestones. So first, we're going to talk about early stage brands when you're just getting started. What are the key tools that you need? Then from a growth stage between $500,000 and $2 million, what are the different tools that you need from there? And then from $2 million up to 10 million and beyond, how will your business change and how will it look? And so we're going to jump into that in just a second. For everyone who's joining in, I would love for you to write in the chat where you're joining us from. So enter in your the city location and also what's your company. I'd love to see who's in the audience here. As always as well, please ask questions throughout. So if you have a question based on anything one of the panelists says, please make sure to just write that in the chat. I'll keep an eye on that and add to the conversation as it comes up. So I'm looking forward to jumping on in. So to get started, I'd like to introduce our panelists today. We have David Greenfeld, who's the CEO of Dream Pops, joining us. We have Shastri Mahadeo, who's the CEO of Unioncrate, and John Schiaroli, who's CEO of Armatura. And so what I'd love to do is for you guys just to give a quick introduction on who you are and the background that you're joining us from. And then for those who don't know me, Jordan, so I run my own brand, Tsquare, which is a line of superfood energy bars, and also started Foodbevy, the online community for food and beverage founders to help brands grow from startup to scale. So David, why don't you kick us off with the introduction?
They would line for membership?
Yeah.
Would you mind saving my place?
Hey guys, how's it going? Jordan, thanks so much for putting this on. Really awesome topic and I think really amazing resource. Excited to talk about this. So, hey guys, I'm David Greenfeld. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Dream Pops. We are trying to reimagine ice cream for the next generation with all plant-based ingredients and functional ingredients. And really pumped to be here today to share a little bit of our experience, things to do and things not to do. And, really pumped to be here. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks. Shastri, you want to jump in?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for the time here. Again, my name is Shastri. I'm the CEO and founder of Unioncrate. I ran a brand for about 5 years prior to founding Unioncrate and just built the company based on the problems that I struggled building and scaling a brand. So what Unioncrate does, it helps brands to centralize all of the operations. So everything from sales orders, inventory, EDI, and purchasing. And as brands continue to grow, we're one of the only companies to offer an artificial intelligence demand planning solution for brands.
Awesome. John, why don't you run this up here? John, I had you on mute, I think on your phone, if you can unmute that.
Can you hear me all right now?
All right, we are good.
Excellent. Thanks, Jordan. Appreciate it. Excited to be here. John Schiaroli, founder of a company called Armatura Company. We are a outsourced operations agency. So we act as your operations department, working anything from product development all the way through running customer service, co-packer sourcing, strategic relationships, and the like. Been around in the food and beverage space for about 15 years with Vitamin Water all the way through Coke, Pepsi, and some startups, Runa, as well as Watermelon Water. And we help brands to figure out what are the foundational planks to put in the supply chain and operations as they grow. So from 0 all the way to 30 million.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone, for that. So kicking and jumping right into it, let's talk about the first stage that businesses go through. Businesses starting out, they're at $0 and on that path to proving their product market fit, on their way to $500,000. What are the tools that you've used yourself or that you've seen brands use as they grow through that first stage? And what are the problems that brands often encounter?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, because I'm not running a brand per se, like some of the other folks here have run brands, it's really important for any founder and any brand to really have some good intel from folks that have done it before, which is why we're all here, right? Because you need to be organized. You need to make sure that from a base point of view, you know how a business runs, right? The way business runs today is no different than how it ran 50 years ago, but the tools are better. Right, so we have to buy stuff, we have to make stuff, we have to distribute stuff, we have to know the costs all along the way. So knowing how to organize that and keep track of it and knowing how it goes through the business cycle, from my perspective, is critically important before you have sales dollar one. There's the planks we're going to talk about, right, and the tools along the way. But that's my perspective as an outsourced company.
Awesome. And one maybe point of definition here, I think, in supply chain, for those who might be new to the industry as well, what we'll be talking about is everything from making your product to getting it to the customer at the end. So ingredient sourcing, manufacturing, either yourself or a co-manufacturer, working with distributors and getting that to your end customer and receiving those purchase orders and filling that to the customer. So David, I know you've been kind of on this fast rise with Dream Pops. What were some of the initial problems that you encountered as you were building out your supply chain, and what are some of the tools that you used?
Totally. Where do I begin? So, with Dream Pops, I think I'm happy to share all the mistakes, but also, we've experienced everything from making Dream Pops in my mom's kitchen all the way through multiple phases of, commercial kitchens, shared spaces, our own space, and now kind of a hybrid solution of a vertically integrated factory. And so, I guess, what John said earlier is spot on. When you're first starting out, it's really easy to create something, it's not easy to create something that's unique and differentiated, but if you can create something that is unique, but it costs you far more than, the inputs necessary to actually have a profitable model, then you're in a lot of trouble. And where I see a lot of founders have issues early on is they're in love with their product and they're incredibly passionate. But the reality of the situation is, a $14 RTD can of a beverage, or, a price point that might work in a specialty retailer like an Erewhon, or, that's a good example locally, might not necessarily be something that can scale nationwide. So getting your goals intact and understanding, is this a product that is going to be in every American household, or is this just a lifestyle brand that it's fine? Maybe it doesn't need to be a $100 million company, but being very honest with yourself and understanding what it is that you're setting out to build. Once you've done that, like John said, understanding pure unit economics for a phase one beta launch of a concept and how you're going to scale that up. I think people can also get really overwhelmed because they're like, man, my product isn't at a 40%, 60% gross margin right off the bat. Things that people need to realize is there's always a way to tweak the formulation, to improve the processing, to find a co-packer, to make adjustments to packaging. So not being so obsessed in the early days, but having something that falls within a practical business model. Yeah, I don't know if there's somewhere you want me to start specifically. I could talk about manufacturing. I could talk about what tools were used in that early upstart days. Where should I kind of guide the conversation?
Well, if I could even jump on to David's comment, those are great comments on unit economics. Yeah, as a young brand, to his point, don't be afraid if you don't see the gross margins that you're hearing that you need. But it's good to do a little bit of the work to understand what potentially would it take to get there. Because if you can never have line of sight to the right economics at any volume, in any way, then you have to sit back and think about, well, why? Are there trade-offs? Can I live with those trade-offs? Because if you can never get there and you can never make it work at any scale, and I've worked for brands and have been supporting brands that you could buy truckloads of stuff and you still can't get there. So just wanted to add on to that. It's a great point, David.
Yeah, I agree with both what you guys are saying. I mean, back when I started a brand in 2012, it was that the resources that are available now was not even close to available back then. And I think, to what, you all were saying, that leveraging the networks that are actually available and the resources that are available to really understand what you should avoid and what you should be kind of like going gung-ho towards is very important, because that's there, right? And the unit and economics, like I made that mistake really early on. Everyone wants to start selling online, even more than it was back in 2012 or 2016. And no one ever really thinks about what this means when you're selling a product to a distributor, or then you're selling it from a distributor to a retailer, and the margins that need to come out of that. And everyone wants to optimize just for online and for D2C, but don't really think about the unit economics when the business scales. And that is a huge mistake that I made early on. And it's really hard to come back from that once you price the suggested retail without incorporating what everyone else is going to take out of that pie along the way. And it's super important to think about that first and foremost when you're starting a brand.
Yeah, those are all really great points. And I think that's maybe one of the biggest takeaways at the beginning is designing your product to actually make money, or be on the path to make money, and understanding your margins along the way. And Shastri, like you were mentioning, thinking about all the channels that you could ever possibly sell to from the very beginning. Otherwise, you'll end up having to redo your pricing, 2-3 times as you're growing. And so the margin structure selling on your own D2C website looks different from selling on Amazon, which looks different from selling to like convenience stores and smaller outlets that want 50-60% margins to grocery. And so you really have to kind of begin with the end in mind as you are thinking about all those different components. And then the other thing as well is understanding the different prices for the temperature state as well. So, right, and David, like being a refrigerated product is much harder, or a frozen product is much harder than being a shelf-stable product when it comes to kind of thinking about the pricing along the way.
Yeah, and the good thing is, like, the information is available now, more than it ever was. People will tell you, what the price one becomes at certain volumes, and what are the volume breaks. So really doing your homework is important, because that information is actually available, and people are more transparent than ever, I believe, in sharing that, because they want you to work with them.
Yeah. So and here's a thought, David, maybe you can piggyback on this as well, but in thinking about Tsquares when we first got started, right? Ingredient orders, we were buying, just managing everything through email, right? Talking with vendors, going on Google to find who we can work with. Then started basic Google Sheets to keep track of everything, like what our pricing was, to figure out our unit margin, keep track of orders. But honestly, a lot of things kind of got lost, or were just stuck in my head as we were managing what inventory we had coming in. At that point, early stage, like everything was very visual. We had our own facility, so we could like see a pile of product to know like how much we had. And so we kept records, but we weren't doing it daily. It was more like a weekly level, and doing everything like basic Google Sheet forms. David, were you kind of doing the same thing?
Google Sheets, I mean, even Shastri, it's awesome because Shastri's kind of really seen the evolution with Unioncrate, but even in order management in the early days, we were trying to understand what an EDI was, how you even receive orders from, like, getting into a distributor is hard enough, and you're fighting to convince a retailer to take you in, but they want you to work with UNFI or KE. And so even once you're able to get through all the paperwork, which you need to make sure you're pricing yourself accordingly to get margin to UNFI and then margin to your retailer, understanding the nuances there, really crucial. But then on top of that, making sure when you receive the orders from the distributor, there was a point where we were getting an email order, and, I didn't understand the processes on the EDI, and I was literally, mailing invoices and POs and receiving our orders through email, and then responding and sending those, basically doing a lot through the mail and through email. And so when you work with someone like Unioncrate, they allow you to kind of streamline and bring on that order processing service into a single dashboard. That was a huge game changer for us when the order influx started to increase. But yes, back to your question, we're using Google Sheets, Excel to manage all of our inventory. We do inventory tracking on a weekly basis. And I think just making sure you're plugged in with each of those distributors and understand how, you're going to receive an order, and then how you're going to project the demand. We were just doing that basically in Excel and in Google Sheets.
Did you ever end up in a situation where you lost an order kind of in the email shuffle, or someone reached out like, hey, did you get this PO? And you look back and maybe it came in like 2 weeks ago?
We never lost an order, but we definitely shorted orders and were unprepared. And actually we did. That's not true. I definitely had like a KE email that was an order that went to my spam inbox, and I didn't understand how to receive it. And yeah, so like you're leaving money on the table. And so, I think just getting organized, making sure that a lot of people too, like they don't understand what their raw materials look like on a weekly basis, how that's converting to finished goods, what it really costs to make a product. And once you've sold the product, are you paying for freight? Is this an FOB pricing or a delivered pricing? I think that, someone's asking what kind of software were you using? For us, we were tracking everything in QuickBooks and Excel. Now, we're using Unioncrate, QuickBooks, and SOS, which is an inventory management system, all kind of interlinked, which has been great for us. But, I'd be curious how other people were kind of going about it.
Yeah. David, you don't have to use SOS. You can come to us for inventory as well. I'll let me make sure Nate reaches out to you for that one.
There you go.
But anyways, no, I think, look, when you're first starting out a brand, Excel is where it's at, and QuickBooks is definitely the #1 thing you guys should, start working with. QuickBooks Online, specifically because QuickBooks Enterprise is on its way out, as per my contacts and into it. But Excel is where it's at in the early stages. But as David was mentioning, keeping in mind that if you do want to scale and you do want to grow a business, software is what you have to look at. And again, not trying to toot Unioncrate's horn. This is talking about any type of software, whatever software you decide to use. Just make sure you are thinking about using something that will help you with order management, help you with inventory, help you with purchasing, and so on and so forth. Because trying to save that money and trying to save that can actually cost you more money in the long run because you don't understand the unit economics, or you might miss things along the way. And secondly, trying to save that kind of money up front in spending on any kind of software that you decide to use, whether it be QuickBooks or any other inventory management tool, could cause you to actually take up a ton of time managing the business instead of spending time trying to sell and grow the business. So it's completely fine to be on the Excel sheet and the QuickBooks Online early on, but understanding that Excel sheet has to go away if you want to cross that million mark.
Yeah, I think
I totally agree. I totally agree. We work with brands all the time that are in this conundrum, this like up to $1 million. What do we do? I feel like I need to have, maybe I need software, maybe I don't. And I agree that if you're growing and you want to continue to scale, you do need to get into something, whatever that something is. Excel is a great way to be organized. Google Sheets is great because you can share. But it becomes extremely laborious, right? Tracking inventory. Yeah, every single week you've got to, or month or whenever you do it, you've got to have a cadence. You have to have a process. You have to have somebody count it. You have to enter it in manually. There's data entry errors, et cetera. So, what I'd say is, at least from my perspective, when we work with clients, we don't just let them, jump off a bridge into software. We help them build the foundations and have an understanding of what is inventory control, right? How do you classify inventory? How do you call it? Packaging, ingredients, et cetera. Finished goods, how do you do that as well? So there's some inherent logic and understanding of knowing how it should run, so that when they get into a piece of software that's going to, support, it's going to exacerbate the process that they already know in a different way and let them run faster so they understand it.
No, I think that's great. And maybe, John, we'll stick with you for this next part. So in transitioning from brands from that early stage, 0 to 500,000, as they're growing towards, 500,000, towards $1 million, 2 million, what are some of the problems that you've seen brands kind of running up against when it comes to managing their supply chain?
Yeah, this may sound funny, but it's not. Almost every emerging brand I've ever either worked in or done some work for, rarely does the brand know how much stuff they have and where it is. And I know it doesn't get more basic than that, but this is your money and or your investors' money. So if you think about it that way, and that's the way I start to educate, like just know where all your stuff is and how much of your stuff that you have, right? Because that's going to then dictate, can I fulfill orders? Can I fulfill production? So there's that base that we want to make sure that brands have good visibility into that, which is your basic inventory control. From there, we want to help them, and I suggest that, and we help them with their process to organize it a step further so that when they integrate into something, whatever that thing is, whether it's a Unioncrate, whether it's QuickBooks, whether it's the like, we want to have that data in a format and a way that is easy to translate into. So the transition into it isn't like this laborious 3, 4, 5 month process, which as an emerging brand, you don't have time for. Like, you need to plug and play, you need to run, because it's all about selling and growing. But you do need a good foundation and a backbone, otherwise you're going to crash. So, we index really, really hard on getting some structure into how things are organized from an inventory control point of view, because it's super critical. That's your finances, that's your money, that's your stuff. It's not as sexy as maybe some other things in the business like marketing and selling and Instagram. But if you don't know where your stuff is, you don't know how many you have, if you don't call it the same thing across every sheet and every purchase order and every email, stuff's gonna get lost, and it winds up costing you time, and time is money.
That's so true. And I know Shastri, right? Like, the reason you even started Unioncrate was because you were running into this issue with your own business. So talk about like what some of those barriers were with your previous business that you were running into that even led to the ideation for Unioncrate.
Yeah, I mean, this company was completely started by accident. We were using Excel sheets and QuickBooks Online for the order management, inventory management. And then we were working with like SPS Commerce or EDI, which is really expensive for a stupid thing like just sending a document, right? And as we were continuing to grow, we had to be able to forecast what we should order from China, from India, Japan, all the places we were sourcing products from, and when it should come down to the port, when it should go to the co-man we're working with, when it should leave the co-man to the warehouse, and then when it's going to go to the customers. Doing all that in Excel sheet was a pain. And I started to look at a variety of systems. I looked at Deer, I looked at even look at NetSuite, and I didn't want to have to pay a $30,000 to $100,000 onboarding cost for NetSuite and find out later on that I still have to pay a couple $100,000 with SPS or EDI, and then NetSuite couldn't do demand planning for me properly. So tried to build something internally, ended up running into a developer back in 2017, who is now the co-founder of the company. He asked me where the bathroom was in the event, and here we are today. He helped me to build Unioncrate, and one of the first things we built was an AI that takes in point of sale data from over 100,000 retailers across the United States to be able to predict what's causing consumers to buy products at specific occasions, specific times, and then allow a brand to forecast what they're going to ship by clicking a button within the platform. And then what that kind of like evolved to is that we saw a lot of brands were struggling with a lot of the order, inventory, and purchasing systems that exist today, and they were spending a ton of money on EDI, and they were considering going to NetSuite when they started to grow, and we wanted to kind of fix that problem. So we created our own kind of ERP internally where a brand can manage their sales orders, whether it be on Amazon or Shopify or to brick and mortar retailers. We built our own EDI system in-house, and we only charge brands $1 per connection, which is like unheard of in the industry. No one does that. It's basically free. And allow them to integrate with their warehouses, like you were mentioning, John, the visibility, right? We will integrate with the warehouses for them to allow them to view kind of like all the inventory across any location at any given time. And that was really all completely by accident, me just trying to build a homegrown system, finding a developer to do that, and then it just kind of evolved. And we grew from just 2 guys in 2017 to almost 50 people. Today, kind of working with brands like Spindrift and Cauliflower and Dream Pops and Jade Leaf, and the list goes on and on.
I think that's a huge kind of point there too. So that's great. David, what kind of went through the process on your end when you made that transition from doing everything in Excel and Google Sheets to using Unioncrate? Like, was there an incident that happened? Were you just kind of doing forward thinking planning? Were there some barriers that you were going through? Talk me through what that process looked like.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty nerve-wracking because the company was growing, and as like I'm trying to stay focused and continue ensuring that sales are up, quality control is solid, that our manufacturing is on point. And you keep having this thing building up where you feel like the foundation is not there and that you're not organized. And so was lucky that, one thing that Unioncrate did is we worked with a guy named Miguel who really onboarded us. It took a lot of convincing and persuading, but it's one of those things that once you invest the time, it's going to take you a few months to onboard, but then it just makes your life so much easier and it saves so much time. And so I was very hesitant to give that time away because I wanted to be focusing on building the company. But when you realize that your business can only get so big unless the foundation is there, unless you're properly receiving orders, projecting what your demand is going to look like. One of the biggest challenges we had is we were in the space, the commercial kitchen we were in was too small, so we're moving into a larger commercial space. We're ordering a lot more raw materials, and the order sizes were getting larger and larger. And so it just felt like this cluster of, chaos that needed to be tamed through a system. And so, I think founders, even myself, like I'm not necessarily a technology guy, I'm more of a finance guy. So Excel comes to me a lot more naturally than onboarding into a new interface. But then, once I bought in and put the time in, it just made my life a lot easier because everything started to become automated, and and then it opened up more time for me to focus on building the brand and the company.
Yeah, I think that's a similar thing that happens with a lot of brands, right? It's like when managing your inventory and that process becomes, increasingly more and more of your time because it's more complicated. You need to look at systems to really streamline that and make it an easier process. Again, speaking from my example at Tsquare as well, we built everything off of Google Sheets, and what started off as like 1 or 2 sheets is now this very, very intricate web where we take in like purchase orders, we have inventory tracking, we manufacture our own product, and so our employees have like a Google form that they fill out at the end of each production shift with our inventory reports, our production reports, and that all automatically feeds and updates. And so it's been good, but we're definitely close to a breaking point where if we need an additional insight or data, because everything's linked, the whole system can fall down essentially. And so, the next step is then how do we untangle that web, take the historical data and all the information that we have and build that into a new system so that we can better track everything. And so I think when it becomes like such a headache where you're losing information or you need to make a change and it's going to cause you hours and hours to rebuild the system anyway, it might be good at that point to think about how do you kind of future-proof your supply chain process, and so that you can build it not just for the next $200,000, but for the next $10 million. A couple questions.
I think one thing I just would like to add to it that a lot of founders don't think about is oftentimes when you're stuck in a certain disorganized foundation, I think founders keep thinking, okay, I need to raise more money to continue fueling the growth of a company, versus if I fix the unit economics and understand the larger picture here, I can reduce burn. And by reducing burn for every unit made, or even just on a monthly basis, instead of having to raise money to continue growing the company, you're effectively raising money through optimized cash burn. And so I think that that's something just on a larger picture. When I thought about that, man, if I'm more organized, I'm buying inventory or raw materials in, in larger quantities, I'm understanding my tolling and where I'm heading, I won't have as much of a burn and I won't have as much cash required to continue scaling the company.
Very good.
Totally agree. Great point.
So a couple questions that came into the chat wrapping up this session. So from Kinda Chocolates, and Karen asked, do you have software that you recommend that integrates well with QuickBooks? She's not seeing any, but always looking to streamline.
We integrate with QuickBooks, Shopify, Amazon, and a bunch of others as well.
Yeah. And there are a lot of things that also hook into QuickBooks. Just depends what you're looking for. So, Unioncrate certainly is a great option, but there's a suite of plugins. If you just go to their site, you can take a look what's there as well. Yeah. Anything from inventory management all the way through time cards. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of plugins.
Yeah, just if you look on QuickBooks, like integrations, if you're looking for something very kind of like lightweight, if it's not inventory, if it's like maybe CRM or something else, and they do have a bunch of plugins there as well.
No, those are great. And then Anne asks, maybe you guys can all talk on this part, but Anne asks, how do we factor in product shelf life data into your inventory management so you have eyes on how much inventory you have and when it's going to expire?
By lots, I would say, but I'll let David take that one.
Yeah. So, what I will say is like software is really important for what we do, and Unioncrate is being one of those arms, but we still have, Excel spreadsheets, and we still on a weekly basis, our manufacturing partner is giving us updates on, we get every week, we have a finished goods file and a raw materials file. So we track our finished goods that are kind of sitting in the warehouse. And we're lucky that we have about a year shelf life, but we're constantly tracking each of those lots to ensure that, we're selling that product in a timely fashion. So back to your question, how do you incorporate shelf life data? You just need to make sure that you're tracking those respective lots and that your product isn't piling up in a warehouse. And that comes back to using systems like Unioncrate to demand plan. If you know what your upcoming demand is, yes, for us, we look at typically having 5 to 7 weeks worth of finished goods on hand at a time based on the demand planning that we're doing. And I've seen companies get into issues where the MOQs are too high with a co-packer. They run hundreds of thousands of units, and then they're forced to sell it before spoilage. So I think you just have to be really thoughtful on what your projected demand is, how you're going to sell through that product, and watching it closely.
And one thing we do as well, and I'll only speak to our software just because I only know the function from that perspective. I don't know how other software does it, but what we do in the lot tracking piece of the inventory management is will allow you to assign the lots to specific orders. So if you're working on a FIFO, LIFO, or however you're running the business, you can assign certain lots to be triggered for certain orders that come in. So if you wanted for the month of November, it only to pull inventory from a specific lot, and then the next month you wanted to pull from another lot, or you want to change lot assignment based on the time of the month, you can do that as well. But assigning the shelf life to the lots and then choosing what lots are going to go out based on the orders that are coming in is how we kind of allow brands to do that.
Yeah, and what I'll add to that is there's two sides of it. There's the side you bought so much to get a good price, and holy crap, I want to make sure the stuff doesn't spoil. But then there's also the side as you're scaling and you are growing. We're supporting a brand right now that's been growing 300% a month, and so they're bulking up on inventory. But as they open up more doors and more distributors, there's retail compliance, which becomes a real thing, and certain retailers want certain amount of shelf life. They want it, and you have to have a tool that can, that you can put it in that gives you those thresholds that, Shastri's kind of talking about, where if it's Target or if it's whomever, and they always want a certain guaranteed amount of shelf life. Sometimes you have to go out of FIFO, just because they will refuse it at the door. So, having the ability, primarily as we've all shared, tracking your lot codes, but two, as you get into retailer compliance, your 3PL and your systems need to be able to have that ability so that even though you get the order and you ship it out and the product's still good, you don't want to show up at the door and they look at the lot code and they reject the order, because that can happen. So having a tool that has that ability to be able to have it in the customer setup that says, I must ship out something that has, I'm going to make it up, 6 months on it or 10 months, whatever it is really important.
Yeah, you want to definitely, and we saw that, and we've actually made a bunch of improvements even to cater for some of those things that you mentioned, John, on the lot tracking side. And it's really important for the brand to have full control of what gets sent for fulfillment based on the lot that they want to go out, because if you leave it up to the fulfillment center or the warehouse to do that, they might choose the wrong thing and send it out. So I think having really, really granular lot controls and having that process automated as the orders come in is really important when shelf life is an issue.
And then Todd asks, at what revenue threshold do you recommend hiring your own internal supply chain manager versus outsourcing?
I should probably not answer that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's all case by case, and for us, because we self-manufacture and have our own factory, it's a little bit different than if you're just co-packing. You know, I would say the question is, when should you hire a full-time person to manage like the supply chain itself? Is that what it was?
Yep, exactly.
You know, I would say it's really like it can be done, you know, sub 500K, but you know, depending on the growth trajectory and the complexity of the business, how many inputs there are, who's manufacturing it, it's tough to say that there's like a revenue threshold where that matters. I do think oftentimes founders undervalue or underestimate how important the supply chain skills and foundation are, and the earlier that you can build some sort of a foundation or even hire a consultant or somebody like John to work with who can give you a foundation, that money is so well spent versus trying to figure it out on yourself and getting burned because you didn't think about how you were going to scale the business.
Yeah,
I mean, one thing that I'll just say is the two main things that I found for most food businesses are sales and operations, and you really need to have someone at the top managing each of those. Like starting out, it could be one, you know, yourself as the founder, but you really need someone with like top line visibility into both of those, because those are going to be the bulk of where you spend your time. There's also like marketing and finance, the other things which are important, but you need to have someone like really in-house that has a line of sight on operations or sales, whether they manage the entire thing or get help.
Yeah, I agree to that. And it is a case by case situation depending on where you're at as a business. It is also very important to have someone internally for operations, but overall supply chain, I think it is important to have someone like John at your side as well, that or someone that has experience running brands or scaling brands. I think that is actually very valuable at the very early stages as well.
Yeah, I mean, the way we have worked with brands in the past is, you know, it's not cookie cutter, as we've all just said right now, but there is definitely a piece of, if you're going to be working with an outsourced agency, whether it's Armatura or, you know, like a Rodeo CPG or a City Shot or what have you, there's often a lot of value in leveraging the resources that you get from companies like that, because you get more than just a single individual that's trying to do a lot of different things. You get teams, so you actually get an operations department in those cases that can do order fulfillment, customer service, logistics, production planning, et cetera, all those things. So, you know, we've worked with brands that run outsourced to acquisition because they want to run lean. So a little bit of that is strategic as well. So, you know, there's no wrong answer, but there's resources out there. Just ask. Figure out what you need to know, so that even if you do hire internally, you know, you're making sure you're getting the right stuff done. And if you need help, there's people out there that can help.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest barriers that founders run into is having a very short-sighted view of their operations, right? You're thinking about how am I going to make product this week or this month? And it's difficult when you're in the trench to take a longer plan view of, is my current setup going to take me to the next level, or am I going to see some substantial barriers to getting there? And I think that's where it helps when like talking, either like having an outsourced partner completely, or at least as an advisor, to understand like what are those milestones that you're going to hit, what are those new barriers as you get there, and how can you start preparing for them now so everything's not a shit show on the way to doing it.
Yeah, and I'll just add experience from, and I won't name the brands, but yeah, brands that, you know, we've supported that are amazing brands that are on a massive growth trajectory, that the operations and supply chain backbone wasn't really considered as much, but they were amazing marketers. And what winds up happening as a challenge is, because that backbone is not in place, often brands that are growing at that type of rate, it takes so much longer for the operations to catch up to all of that stuff that's happening from a customer point of view, and it's painful. And you do wind up shorting orders, and you do wind up missing things, and you do wind up burning, and you go through this phase of doing whatever it takes to fulfill and support the growth before you can get to that threshold of being more strategic, that we're laying a foundation for 1 year, 2 years, 3-year growth. So with the right partners, with the right capacity planning. So it's challenging. You know, it's definitely worth at least exploring. even if you don't spend a penny, talk to someone about what do I do, which is why we're all here today, right?
David, I know you've gone through a couple different transitions, as you mentioned, from kind of a shared kitchen to now having your own space to a hybrid. Talk about some of those transition steps and why you decide to manufacture in the way that you do now.
Yeah. So, you know, have early days was doing exactly what we just mentioned, was just sitting down with as many founders as I could buy coffee for to just understand how they were scaling their businesses. With Dream Pops in particular, co-packers and co-mans that we would sit with in frozen could not manufacture the bars the way that we do, with kind of, it's a unique process with liquid nitrogen. And I will say, you know, my fundamental belief in food and beverage is there's so many products and so many competitors that oftentimes the hard way is going to be the best way. People are telling us to change the shape, make it easy, use a co-packer, use normal ingredients. But, you know, it took us 4.5 years to commercialize it. So back to your question, you know, went from manually hand making this product, not in a way that was scalable, to, like we said, bringing in consultants, sitting with as many people as we could in frozen manufacturing, perishable, juice, in adjacent industries, and bringing minds together and continuing to gain momentum and make tweaks and adjustments. We finally found a manufacturing partner that helped us go from a fully manual process to a semi-automated process with how we were molding and creating the bars. So went from a commercial space, 500 square feet, quickly into about, you know, 1,500 square foot space in a separate shared facility. And then lucky enough, you know, we found a factory that had extra capacity because of what was happening with COVID, and actually let us move in. And so we have our own factory within a factory model. With a manufacturing partner, we paid for all the CapEx for our own line, but we have a manufacturer that we pay a tolling fee to. So kind of a hybrid vertically integrated model. I think back to your question, some of the things I regret not doing earlier, I was stubborn and just thought that I didn't need to do things the traditional way. I didn't need to listen to experts in the industry, because the one thing that is tough is I feel like there are a lot of people that have experience that are very set in their ways. I mean, we had 40 plus people tell us that we could not scale the product the way it was scaled. And so, you know, a lot of people, because of a roadmap that's worked for them in the past or a case study, assume that things have to be done the same way. You know, I had a lot of people refer us to NetSuite and to other software products that we had to do because there was no other way. And so I would just challenge founders, you know, whenever they're sitting down and thinking about how they want to manufacture or scale their business, not to get stuck in the cookie cutter molded paths that work or playbooks that work, because that's not always the case. Each product category and go to market is always going to be a little bit unique.
Yeah, 100%. I think, you know, we even meet a lot of founders that there's accounting firms that will force them to go into QuickBooks Enterprise specifically because they're used to using that, and that's what the people are using. But in reality, the probably better bet for them to use is a QuickBooks Online or a QuickBooks Advanced because of its integration capabilities, right? And you have some people that are kind of stuck in their ways and pushing people to the NetSuites of the world and so on, because that's what they're kind of used to. But I completely echo what David's saying. Do your homework. You know, I'll say this because coming from building a brand in 2012 to 2016, there weren't many resources available. I was also in a shared kitchen. You know, to find my suppliers, I had to go to page 20 on Google. There was no like CPG, there was no Foodbevy, there was no Slack channel. There was none of those things, right? And there's a lot of resources available today to really do your homework. It's not always about just trusting the first advice that you hear.
And I always tell brands to similar to what David mentioned, understand what it is that you're getting into, because similarly with Tsquare starting out, I thought like, hey, we're making, you know, take on a granola bar. There has to be dozens of companies that can make our product. And still to this day, there's 0 manufacturers that have all the pieces of equipment in the line to just slot Tsquares into it. And, you know, we would have to do something similar to David in terms of do our own CapEx and buy all the equipment and have them run it. And so for any founder, like understand what the limitations are in the market and then decide, kind of like David was saying, like if you want to take the path of differentiating and having your own specialized equipment, or if your plan is to be as kind of low CapEx as needed and want to use the existing systems, understand the differences, and then make an informed decision, right? Both are possible, but there's financial implications and timing implications to that as well. Even, onboarding with a new manufacturer can take 2 months, 6 months sometimes, or even getting line time. So there's long-term planning that's needed to make those decisions.
Yeah.
All right, and then,
go
ahead, John.
If I could just add to that a little bit, self-manufacturing, co-man in general, or if you want to get it going into investing and tying up working capital, for your business, you got to ask yourself, one, do I have the resources, not just the money resources, but the mental resources and the right people to guide me to be both a manufacturer and a sales and marketing company? Because at the end of the day, we're all trying to sell product to retailers, which the sales and marketing piece of it is a huge piece of it. It's sometimes it is a challenge to do both. So it's great to get great advice from folks that have done it. If you're something that's truly unique, like a Dream Pops, like a Tsquare, I get it. You're disrupting the market. I mean, if you don't have any options, then you don't have any options. But it's a challenge. It's a conversation to kind of have with yourself and say, am I in this to be a manufacturer as well as someone that's going to sell my brand?
Definitely.
John, can I ask you a question from all the brands that you've worked with, what your experience has been like? Because I couldn't agree with you more. I feel like even in the last 5 years, there were a lot of brands that were just purely marketing companies that succeeded. But now as the market's gotten more and more saturated with more competitors, it's harder to differentiate. A lot of people are using the same co-mans. What are brands doing now to differentiate themselves if they're not self-manufacturing?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of, we could talk about this for another few hours, but in a short version of it, depending on the space that you're in, you have to ask yourself, well, who am I against, right? Who am I fighting against? If I'm selling, I'm just going to make it up, cola. Okay, well, you're fighting Coke and Pepsi, right? So what do I need to do to attract someone to buy my thing versus their thing? Do I need to have my own bottling line? Probably not. You probably could have somebody make it. It's all about the brand at that point, right? It's the brand, it's the community, it's the people you bring into your brand, which is often a point of differentiation. But the first checkbox is the product just lights out, amazing and delicious? And it can come out of a co-packer that's making something similar. But if your recipe, if your formulation, if your team's put together something that just lights out, and you've got a brand that people resonate and understand quick, like 10 seconds or less, silent salesperson, when it's on the shelf, you get 10 seconds or less. If you can hit those two things, that's where I've seen brands really succeed, even if they aren't self-manufacturing. Self-manufacturing is when there's no other options. I'm a big fan of it, right? If you've exhausted every option, I'm a huge fan of it. If there's a way to do it with a slight tweak, we often advise brands to take that working capital and put it into fuel the growth of the company as a sales and marketing piece. So it's a tough call to make, but that's what we've seen. That's what we advise. Even when I worked for Milk Bar and they ran operations for Milk Bar, it's a bakery. You would assume that they make all their stuff. I'll just leave it at that.
So John, maybe sticking you we have about 10 minutes left. If anyone has any additional questions that have come up in the conversation or things that you're dying to ask, either about operations, Unioncrate, some of the other software, add that to the chat right now. We'll get to that in the last 5 minutes. But let's just quickly talk about what changes kind of at that next stage. So when companies hit, say, about 2 million as they're growing beyond there, what are some of the key considerations that they need to do in order to streamline their processes that's different at an earlier stage?
I would say the hope is that at that point, you've done some of the other stuff we've chatted about, right? So you've laid the foundation, you've got the right tools in place. You're already doing that forward thinking, that forward view into the business as far as capacity that's needed from every part of your supply chain, whether it's a 3PL provider all the way through your ingredient suppliers. And the hope is that you've already done that, right? So you know that if you're going to step on the gas and go from 2 million and you're seeing velocities growing exponentially, and you have line of sight to get to 5 million over the next 18 months, the hope is that you've already put those foundations and partners in place. at that point, you know, it's as quick as you can make it and quick as you can set it out there because you've done the work. If you haven't done the work, it's going to be a little painful because you're going to have to catch up, like I mentioned. You're going to have to work really hard, really fast, and tactically, short term, to both fulfill that growth as you go from 2 million to 2 million to 1. Because if you've made it to 2 million in a short amount of time, there's probably a good reason for that, and that means that train is moving. And if you haven't put all the wheels in the car, it's going to be a challenge. It can be done, but it's going to be a challenge. So just overstressing the stuff we've already talked about, get that stuff done. Even, you know, it's like having extra horsepower in a car, but you never need to step on the gas. You're just ready for it.
Yeah.
John, can I ask you a question about that? Or sorry, Shastri, go ahead.
No, just really quickly, I definitely echo that. If you don't have the foundations in place, assuming you have the foundations in place, going to that next level is a little bit easier. And, you know, if you don't have it in place, it becomes very hard. We see brands all the time that come in and they are kind of operating out of their Excel sheets until they're doing 2 to 5 million in revenue. And then they have to stop operations to just kind of like take a step back and refactor everything. And that's super painful. Assuming you do have that in place, from my perspective, I think forecasting is the name of the game. Understanding when to spend money and how to spend money, or when not to do that, is going to be super important. Because money that you're probably spending on, you know, inventory that's sitting in a warehouse that you probably don't need for that month or for that next quarter could be spent on sales and could be spent on marketing. You know, we have a case study right now where we helped one of the brands capture $1 million in 3 months just by better forecasting. So just think about it from that perspective. If you want to go to the next level, freeing up capital and understanding when and how to spend money is going to be super important.
Totally agree.
David, what was your question?
It's really more, and Shastri might be able to talk to this too, is just demand planning for multiple growth scenarios. So if you're looking at 2x growth, 4x growth, and 6x growth, you know, what's tough about the CPG space, specifically if you're focused on retail, which our business is primarily a retail business, we're going through X number of review cycles right now. You know, we have different scenarios, right? You've got a base case, you got a down case, and you got an upside case. So to being able to manage that capital to hit all of those scenarios, you know, I guess the one thing that even with us, you know, we had a really big year in 2020, and we have a certain growth scenarios that we're running through for 2021. Those growth scenarios, because we're a self-manufacturer, require purchasing X number of raw materials. And one of my biggest fears now is just ensuring that the capital is being deployed the right way on the raw material side to ensure that all of those growth targets are within range and that we're not burning money on raw materials that are going to sit in the warehouse. So how do you think about demand planning for different growth scenarios while still being efficient with your cash?
I'll let John take it.
So it's great. It's great to even have the scenarios, right? So if you have the ability to run out those scenarios, it's really good. You know, knowing goes back to, I think, an earlier comment I made. You know, knowing that you have capacity within your supply chain. So when you run those scenarios, you can work on the cash flow scenarios as well, right? To say, okay, if I'm going to go 2x, what does it mean to activate that? My lead times, my MOQs, my cost of goods, and then you can work your way through all of those types of scenarios. You know, a lot of basic stuff, and I'm sure some of it is in Unioncrate, but a lot of basic stuff around just looking at your velocities and saying, you know, looking at what is my longest lead time item to make something, and knowing that if it's, let's just make believe it's 4 weeks to get from, you know, purchase order of ingredient to finished good, then layering that into that time frame into, if I'm going to go 2x and 4x and 6x, when would I need to activate the supply chain to turn more on to be able to support it, if that makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's important, like John mentioned, just building multiple scenarios and knowing when to activate that, right? I mean, you can try to do this in Excel. Again, I'll talk to like how we kind of do it internally here is, for brands, is that, you know, we'll have our Unioncrate generated forecast, if you will, that is based on the velocity of your products moving through the store, what you're selling to distributors. It's even based on ingredient patterns, nutrition patterns, you know, consumer panel data that we take in data from over 2 million households, and we're forecasting based on that. But if you think that your growth is going to be, 10% higher because of this scenario, or 20% higher because of this scenario, what we've allowed brands to do is just create multiple scenarios within the platform. And when they see that, will then affect the inventory numbers or what their recommended PO should be for that specific scenario. And again, you can do this in Excel. It does not have to be within us. The benefit for a software is that you'll just get an AI doing it for you. But when you decide what that scenario is going to be, then you can just adjust it and then have everything trickle down. But it is important to have multiple scenarios and set a lock-in period for when you're going to decide on which scenario you're going to move forward with.
Yeah, and one other thing I'll add to that, I know we're running out of time, is the partnerships that you have with all of your suppliers and vendors, and making sure that if you're working on something, whether it's in Excel or Google Sheets or Unioncrate's giving you some models, are they willing to support you? How do you negotiate a right agreement to say my base 2x is covered, but if I need to go to 5x or 6x midway through the year, do I have that ability, right? And so that's not technical as much as it is relationships and working contractually with your partners.
Yeah, I mean,
Awesome.
The salesperson that you're working with is going to be close to the buyers, right? So that relationship is super key.
Excellent. Sage advice, everyone. So let's leave it there for today. Shastri, David, John, thanks so much for joining. Thanks so much for everyone in the audience today. Hope it was a really insightful conversation for you. If you have any further questions, we'll be sending out a recap along with the recording today or tomorrow, and with information on how you can get in touch with our panelists as well. If you have any follow-up, or if you want to learn more about Unioncrate, working with John, or just get some great advice from David. So keep an eye on that. And then up next, we actually have next week on Friday, our next webinar is with Snack Magic, one of the kind of fastest growing virtual snacking stores. And so if you're a brand, want to get set up on there and want to learn more information, we're talking to the co-founder there. Just go to foodbevy.com/events to get signed up. And we will send out an email as well with more information. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining, and have a great weekend going into the weekend coming up. Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.
Thanks, Jordan.
Everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. Have a great day.